There's a well-known phenomenon called cognitive entrenchment, which is the notion that experts can easily become fixed in their ways of thinking and resistant to new ideas, methods, or perspectives. As someone who spends so much time and energy arguing for analytic idealism, do you ever feel like you get consumed or trapped by this view? How do you prevent cognitive entrenchment?
You're the first one to ask me this question. You're the first one to even correctly suppose that this is something I actively do. So, well, very nice. This has been a unique interview. So I don't even need to preface this to you. I can tell you straight what I do. So what I do is I stick to the most basic story possible with as few flourishings and details and side pursuits and tangential narratives. No, I just stick to the basics. Mind is all there is. There are mental states. The world outside is made of mental states, but not my or your mental states. And the division between outside and inside is a dissociative boundary. This is it. Everything else is sort of an exfoliation of what I just said. So, and I try to stick to the basics. And people like to ask me, what about reincarnation? What about psychic phenomena? What about the aliens? And I entertain the questions, but if you pay attention to my interviews, I don't go down a rabbit hole. I never do that. Does that mean that I don't go down rabbit holes for myself? Of course I do. Of course I do. What I think is going on is more than what I say. But I don't want to become publicly associated with it, because that will give me a profound, a deep, compelling psychological motivation to then not change my mind about the details. See, the moment you become publicly committed to a detailed view full of specifics, it's very difficult to avoid the urge to not backtrack, to not give in, save face. So the way I go about it is what I really think when it goes down to the ultimate details, ultimate implications, and all the tangential lines, because reality cannot be as sober and simple as I communicate, right? I just don't want to commit to more than that, to avoid this cognitive bias. And I do this not only for the sake of who is listening to me, but mainly for my own sake, because that cognitive bias would impair my own evolution as a person. I've been saying largely the same thing for 15 years, just, with different words, different metaphors, different language, but I've been saying the same thing for 15 years. Do you think I am thinking the same thing for 15 years? Of course I don't. But I understand from my daimon, from the will of the impersonal within me, that my fight is the basics. There is no point going down rabbit holes and details and specifics if we don't come to a consensus regarding the basics. So I don't talk about more than the basics. And as a side effect, this gives me the freedom to evolve as a human being without having to fight against entrenchment, the cognitive bias you've talked about, because its greatest effect and damage is on myself. If I become too associated with my public image, I will stop evolving, because this cognitive bias will come to play a role. Right now, it doesn't. And I do sort of dip my toes on certain things, like I wrote about non-human intelligence on planet Earth earlier this year. But if you read what I wrote, it's really conservative. It's really cautious. It sticks to basics. Is that what I really think is going on? No, I think things are more complicated than that. But I don't talk about that because I want to preserve my own psychological flexibility and freedom to evolve as a human being. At the end of the day, I also have a life. It's not only about my readers, Yes, my life is largely a sacrifice, but I also want to evolve. It's part of what nature wants to do through me, is to evolve. So that's how I go about it. Nobody ever asked me this question. So what I say is what I consider to be safe, generic and basic enough to be safe.
I think a lot of people wouldn't agree that what you're saying is safe, but or basic. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I've thought about this before, but the fact that when you vocalize something into the public, it's like there's
You
something in
become
the
committed.
social dynamic where it's like you start now, there's like an identity that becomes around that. And it's interesting because recently I heard somebody say something like, oh, why don't more people, more leaders like speak out about like political or societal issues? And I can see how not speaking on certain things, that gives you the flexibility, like to have changing opinions and be more flexible to reality as it unfolds. Whereas like kind of stepping out and like taking a stand, then it becomes difficult to.
And it's also a matter of preserving one's legacy. If I go too much down certain specifics and details and go down a rabbit hole publicly, if 2 years on I change my mind, then I have to undo that work. I have to go back and say, no, people, wait a moment, don't buy that book anymore. Don't read that essay. I changed my mind. Read this instead. There are people who do that. There is one I know who really does that all the time. I don't think it helps with one's legacy. I think what you really put on the record should be things that, of course, you're not certain about. Monkeys are never certain about anything. It's ridiculous to think monkeys can be certain of ultimate truths. But it's those things that you have contemplated thoroughly enough, for long enough, that you confronted with litmus tests of many kinds, frequently enough that you think, no, here I am on more or less solid ground. That's what you put on the record. And that's how you create a solid legacy. Because if you're coming back on your word all the time, at some point your readers throw their arms up and say, yeah, I know, make up your mind, and 20 years from now, tell me something. But while you're still in that flux, that flow, why will I read you? You don't know, you yourself don't know what you're talking about. So it doesn't help the cultural discourse if we publish drafts, if you know what I mean. If we publish work in progress, we have to achieve a certain level of confidence and stability. We have to have toyed around with certain ideas in our minds for long enough and realize that, well, it's been several years, I've done this, done that, this litmus test, that litmus test, talked to this many people, and I still think that it has survived. Okay, now I put it on the record. So the book I'm writing right now about Western identity and living with the diamond, it's stuff that has been on my mind for 25 years, more, 35 years, since I was a teenager, and which has been stable now for almost 10. So now I feel that if I publish it now, it will not happen that 2 years from now I'll go to my publishers and say, oh, withdraw the book, or let's do another edition, let's kill the previous ones. That's how I go about things.
Yeah. If only
I may be wrong, but at least I'm not so wrong that 2 years down the road, I will disown everything I said.
Yeah, if only everybody had that criteria before they speak. I think like I know I get excited very easily. So like I could read a book and be like, oh, this book is great. And then like a year down the line, it's like, it wasn't that great,
Yeah, you can't wait forever for absolute certainty. Otherwise, you write your book the day of your death. But finding a balance, I think, is important for the cultural dialogue and for one's own flexibility for maturing.